From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Clinical Reviews, interviews and ideas about innovations in medicine, science, and clinical practice.
Hello, and welcome to our listeners around the world. I'm Dr. Kirsten Bibbins-Domingo, the editor-in-chief of JAMA and the JAMA Network. Very occasionally, we depart from the traditional format of the JAMA Clinical Reviews podcast to bring you information that is timely, thought-provoking, and has the potential to shape clinical practice. I recently spoke with Mark Cuban, an entrepreneur and the co-founder of the Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drug Company, an online pharmacy that sells medications directly to consumers at the acquisition cost from the manufacturer plus a 15% markup. The company primarily sells generic medications and for prices that are significantly lower than many traditional pharmacies. Cuban has been outspoken about price transparency and cost-based prices, and his work has challenged the role of pharmacy benefit managers, insurance formularies, and opaque pricing practices that shape how most Americans access prescription drugs. Throughout this interview, Mr. Cuban uses acronyms for many processes and entities in health insurance, including PBMs, which stands for Pharmacy Benefit Managers. The full term for each of these acronyms can be found in the transcript. Mark, there is a lot I'd like to discuss today, but we should probably start by congratulating you and your Indiana Hoosiers on their incredible national championship run.
Thank you. Hoosiers. Oh, what a weekend. Oh, my goodness. I never did I imagine. So thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we're going to go to a lot of places here today, and this can be dense stuff, but I know you have the experience with this cost-plus drug company, and you've basically shown with success there that many generic medications can be sold at a fraction of current prices. In healthcare terms, what does this tell us about the market?
I mean, it tells you that it's not an efficient market. The fact that you mentioned us as having generics when our mission is to sell every drug we're legally allowed to, suggesting that we don't have all that many brands. And it's true, we have some brands and it's growing. But the question then becomes, why don't we have all brands? Why don't we have all specialty medications? And the reason is the big PBMs owned by the big three insurance companies dominate the industry, and their formularies dictate what's paid for and what's not paid for. And if you're a pharmaceutical manufacturer, regardless of what you make, if it's branded, you have to pay, you have to bid in that auction to get on the formulary. Because if you're not on the formulary, those 300 million lives that are covered by insurance probably aren't going to be allowed to buy your medication.
So it's not something specific to generics then?
No, not at all. No, we'd love to sell every single brand, and we'd do it the exact same way if we could. But what's happened, and we'll talk to those brand manufacturers and we'll say, why can't we buy from you? Or why can't we get the same rebates? Why can't we get the same type of deal? And they'll tell us, because if they do it, then those big PBMs and the insurance companies that own them will reduce the positioning of their entire portfolio on those formularies, which could cost them tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars or more. And so they're like, Mark, we love what you're doing. We're trying to find a way to work with you, but we just can't. I spoke to one CEO of one of the companies a month ago, maybe. And I said, how many lives do we need to have covered out of the 180 million before you would say you'll work directly with us? Half. That's a big number.
Yeah.
That's a big number. So the point is, we no longer have an efficient market. In an efficient market, it'd be like, Mark, we'll charge you more, but we'll sell through you, right? It's just like you're selling hammers. You open up a new hardware store. Sure, we'll sell you our hammers, right? You might not get the same price as Walmart, but we'll sell you our hammer. So we've got a system right now that is completely inefficient. And what I've learned over the past 4 years, and literally this week is the 4th anniversary of Cost Plus Drugs, I always looked at it as specific to PBMs. Then what I realized is these big PBMs either own or are all owned by big insurance companies. And they all act the same kind of way.
So what would have to change? And is that possible to shift that to be a more efficient market?
One of two things. First, The most direct path is to require the big insurance companies, the biggest three insurance companies, to divest non-insurance assets. If you don't get them to divest, they effectively have, there's regulatory capture and there's scale capture. And scale capture is where it's so big, nobody really understands how the money flows and how the pieces are interrelated, so that they really define the rules of all the economics of the healthcare industry. They literally define the rules. Divesting not just PBMs, but all their subsidiaries that are not insurance specific.
I see. Yeah.
So, if you happen to be a big insurance company and you own a hospital or a provider or an oncology center or an infusion center or a PBM or, physicians practices. And, we need to make this just like AT&T in 1984, where they controlled all telecommunications. Literally, there's one big healthcare company that's got 2,600 subsidiaries. Their intercompany transfers are $200 billion. That's like that's like 0.6% of the GDP of this country. That's how much control and influence they have. There's just no way for that market to be efficient. And then they use that because they can left pocket, right pocket things. Hey, we're just charging you, and they may or may not mark it up. We're just charging you what the physician charged us, or what the provider charged us, or what the center charged us. And we're just passing it along. And the employer has no idea that they're getting marked up in a way that is just going right to the insurer. Now, that's part one. You break them up.
Yeah.
And if I was a Democrat or a Republican, that would be what I was pushing right now. The second thing is educate employers. There's, 160 million plus beneficiaries in self-pay plans, right? And some of them are public, some of them are private. I'll walk into the CEO of a company. I can walk in and within 5 minutes give you 20 things that tell you how you're getting ripped off. So for instance, right now we just rolled over to a new year. I'll go to the pharmacy side. And let's just say that you happen to use a branded medication. I don't know what your deductibles are for your employees, but for easy numbers, let's just say it's $2,000.
Okay.
Okay. And so if you happen to be prescribed a branded medication that has a retail price of $600. Eliquis was $609 until they just changed it, right? Well, just say it's Eliquis and you're paying $609.
Yep.
You have to pay that full retail price until you reach
High
your
deductible. Right.
right? So where does that money go? Well, for a branded medication like Eliquis was at $600, 50% of that is rebate. So your beneficiary plan holder is paying full retail price. So which first of all means that PBM that you hired is the worst negotiator on the planet, even though they sell themselves as being better for reducing drug prices, because every single one of your beneficiaries, your members that is using a branded medication is paying full retail. And 50% of that, give or take, depending on what the rebate is going to the PBM, who keeps, let's say, 10% of it and sends it to you as your rebate, right? And I'll sit with the CEO and tell them, do you really understand now that your sickest employees and those with the most chronic illnesses that need medications are writing your company a check through those rebates? And then they'll talk to their HR person. They'll be in a panic because I'm like, look, not only are they writing you a check, but there are going to be times when they don't buy their medications because their take-home pay may be $30,000 a year and they couldn't afford the high premium, so they took the higher deductible, and so they can't afford it. And somebody, God forbid, may drop dead because you hired a PBM that wanted to charge them full retail price and you did nothing about it.
So you want to get employers, they're the purchasers, to be involved because you think they can negotiate better.
Yeah, because they have no clue what they're doing. And in many cases, they're using consultants or brokers who are ripping them off even further. Some of those consultants are getting fees from the PBM/insurance companies. And now the PBMs are getting smarter. So it doesn't come from the PBM. It comes from a subsidiary or somewhere else within the empire, if you will, of subsidiaries. And so as an employer, you don't know these things. Particularly for a CEO, it's not your core competency to understand your HR benefits, particularly, how people are paying for brand medications within their deductible phase. And so I'll walk in there and start educating them on how that works. Your second largest expense item after payroll, and you have no clue where the expenses come from.
So tell me this, do you have examples where employers have then now successfully negotiated after you've coached them through this?
Oh, yeah. You've seen 7-Eleven. I've worked closely with them. You've seen, I don't want to say I worked closely with Gentech and Eli Lilly, but I had conversations going through all this with them, and then they took the ball and ran with it. There's other companies that are doing the same thing. So it's happening, but it can't happen fast enough. And so I've had a big enough mouth and screamed loudly enough that you're starting to see PBMs talking about transparency and talking about how they're going to do pass through of all the rebates. But it's a lie because they'll just move it to something else. So while they may do a better job of passing through the rebates, they'll actually charge bigger fees to the pharmaceutical manufacturers and bigger fees to the employers, and the employers won't even know it.
Yeah. So you mentioned Eli Lilly as a company you've talked to. Eli Lilly and other manufacturers are now marketing and distributing drugs directly to consumers as well through platforms like Lilly Direct, often paired with telehealth. So they are also controlling the prescriber. From your perspective, is this a good thing? And will this help us with the pricing issue?
Yes. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
The one thing that's missing in the supply chain of Lilly Direct, Novo, BMS, and the others, there's no PBM.
Right.
There's no PBM in the middle of it at all.
Right.
What's the difference between the pricing that European countries get versus America? They don't use PBMs over there.
Right.
And the amount, if you just looked at the net price that Lilly, Regeneron, Genentech rather, BMS, Pfizer, the net price they get for their branded medications and specialty drugs, if you mark that up 5, 10, 15%, whatever it is, and left out the PBMs, we'd be having a whole different conversation about the price. If it was able to come to cost plus drugs, even if we didn't get as good a price as the big PBMs and we only marked it up 15% and it was transparent, it would be a whole different conversation.
So one of the things that does strike me as different, though, is that when you have someone like Eli Lilly as the producer and the distributor controls the drugs, and then really through telehealth controls the ability to have access to the drugs, from a consumer perspective, it certainly is attractive. I think those of us who sit on the physician side worry a little bit about that.
And rightfully so, right? But there's still doctors on the other side of that video.
Mm-hmm. So you think it's ultimately a force for good, and you're not worried that you're just building up a whole nother system where they control everything about the pricing of their product, which they would.
Definitely a risk. So it's the lesser of two evils. I don't want to, maybe that's not the right word, but on one hand, you have the PBMs owned by the big insurance companies who I truly believe are the cause of all these problems.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, because of the structure and the amount of money they control, the brand manufacturers are trying to figure out ways to work around them. And in the short period of time, it may not be perfect, but it's a step.
Yeah.
And let me just tell you, knowing what I know about some of them, they make less money, a lot less money on the direct to consumer. And in some cases, there's examples where they'll actually lose money, but they're taking these steps to try to change the game.
Well, but they're not in the charity business. They're presumably win on scale, right?
Well, no, yes, on scale, but more thinking strategically down the line.
Uh-huh.
So even though I may not have the optimal scenario today, in 2028, 2029, hopefully we'll have that scale, and we may have bumped out the PBMs at some level. And if they do that, I'm willing to take some of their problems.
I see. So we're united in the PBMs are bad, the insurance companies are sort of overgrowing, and that's the big cause in the
Right. In my mind, that's the underpinning of the problem on the economic side of healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And that influences the care side of healthcare as well, because they're the ones giving you 7 minutes per patient. They're the ones that are telling you all the paperwork you have to fill. They're the ones that are having the pre-auth denials and having you spend multiple hours for however many weeks in front of a committee. You get my point, right?
Yeah.
They introduce these inefficiencies that cost you money.
Right.
And that can't continue. That's a problem.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you describe physicians as good actors in a broken system. And what types of things in our either drug or just the broader insurance market really do you believe interfere with the doctor's ability to take care of patients?
All of it. And on the CMS side as well, I think doctors are underpaid. I think they're rushed. I want my doctors golfing on Wednesday. I like the concept of direct primary care, but it's kind of conflicted because it's hard for people to understand where it fits and everything. But when you look at insurance and the way it's designed, that's the start of the problem. So let's work this through. Use your company again as an example. So you go to an insurance company and some of them bid and you pick one and they come back to you with different plans. And then you decide which of those plans you think best fit what you can afford based off of what the company contributes and what you think that your employees and their families will appreciate and be able to tolerate in many cases and gain the care they need based off the circumstances that you understand, right? So it starts there. And in those plans that they offer, there's lower premiums, higher deductibles, because some people can't afford the premiums or maybe they're healthier, and vice versa. Higher premiums, lower deductibles. In all cases, those deductibles are the gatekeepers for the out-of-pocket, not only to the member, but also to the insurance company. Because the higher the deductible, the greater the risk to the member to be able to pay. And if they can't pay their deductible, either the insurance company benefits by not having to do anything, right?
Right.
Or all those physicians and clinics and providers and even hospitals, right? They want to get that insurance company money. And so they'll tell the patient who's coming in without the money to hit the deductible, you can use this third-party financing or we'll finance for you. And in doing so, we've turned your doctors and the hospitals into subprime lenders because these are the highest risk borrowers that you can find. Now it's cruel in some levels to call them borrowers as opposed to patients, but that's the reality. So
Yeah.
your doctors are taking on debt, hospitals are taking on debt that may or may not even be paid 50%. Then you add to that, so now they're subprime lenders. They're the bad guys when it comes to try to collecting those bills because we hear about the hundreds of billions of dollars in medical debt. Well, that's not coming from the insurance company. It's not for unpaid premiums because if you don't pay your premium,
Yeah.
you're done. You're
Yeah.
canceled, right?
Yeah.
So now let's take that further. So now you've got a plan. You borrowed the money to get past your deductible. So now you're getting care from a hospital, right? And that hospital has an agreement, a contract with the insurance company. And we see those contracts for the most part on the files that are posted on the websites now. So we know that, we know how much the insurance company is paying for that hip replacement. And for the sake of examples, let's just say it's $25,000 is the contracted amount. Well, so now I've covered my deductible. I go in, I need my hip replacement, and the contracted amount is $25,000. The hospital is already acting as a subprime lender. But guess what? They do the hip replacement. Let's just say it gets approved. The insurance company doesn't pay the full $25,000. They underpay.
Yeah.
So they may pick a number, 20,000. So now you're $5,000 underpaid. And they're telling you, sue me if you don't like it, or we'll go to arbitration. So now the hospital has umpteen number of administrative people and lawyers just increasing the cost there, right? And then we add the cost of time value of money for your pre-authorizations, waiting for them to get approved, then the cost of the doctor. And then there's long list of other fees and other things that they'll charge. So now the hospital and the provider, whether it's a one-man show or, a big hospital system, their back is against the wall and they need to quote unquote retaliate. They need to compensate for what they didn't get here by finding sources of revenue somewhere else.
Yeah.
So what do? They invent facilities fees. And it's not because it's fair charging that $5,000 or whatever it is, right? It's because they could, because that's the kind of quid pro quo with the insurance companies. And so now a patient gets the bill and it sees facilities fees and they're like, what's going on? I mean, I'm at the hospital. Of course I'm in your facility. Why are you charging me an additional fee?
Everyone's gaming.
Everybody's trying to game the system in their own way. Hospitals then in turn put together these bills, right, that include stuff that are now out of network to the insurance company because the anesthesiologist was not part of the network. And that comes in a separate bill. So now we're at the level of either the patient
Yeah.
or the self-insured employer
Yeah.
who's getting these bills and has no idea how to audit them or no idea if they're accurate. And so we've got all these arbitrages going on.
Yeah.
But wait, there's more, right? Because now the hospital systems and the PE companies that either partner with them or own them, or the PE companies independently, realize that there are site arbitrages available.
Yeah.
Because that clinic with the 73 physicians that's on the fourth floor of the hospital that does orthopedic surgeries or whatever,
Right.
if they buy them and make it part of the hospital, they get to jack up all the rates.
Right.
Right. And who pays that? Maybe the insurance companies to a certain extent, but the insurance companies are just going to underpay and pay what they want. But the biggest source of beneficiaries or members are the self-insured employers.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear you pull it all together because I think you're describing a system where everybody is trying to find some little leverage point in it to get something more.
And who knows the least and who has the least ability to protect themselves?
Well, patients for
Patients.
sure.
The patient.
Yes, exactly. But it's very interesting to conceptualize this as maybe there are no good guys in this. Patients are definitely losing.
The doctors are still the good guys, I think.
Okay. Let's imagine your world where transparent pricing, you've advocated with employers, you've had the ear of the politician to maybe achieve some divestment of these non-insurance assets. What does the future look like? Do we have insurance companies? Do we have PBMs or PBMs go away? What happens?
Great question. So if I put on my entrepreneurial hat and looked at reinventing all of this, what would I do? Right. And we wouldn't need insurance companies because most of the lives covered are self-insured by self-insured employers, right? The insurance companies that work as the ASOs for those big employers, they don't take any insurance risk. So they're not even acting as insurance companies. They're acting as service companies, right? As systems integrators. And so you don't need them. In that world, right? So we look at how people would have to pay for things, right? Whether it's employers or individuals. So right now, we pay our premiums.
Yeah.
As individuals, as employers, we pay the premiums, and states pay premiums, and whatever it may be, right? We pay premiums, but instead of paying those to insurance companies, because they rarely take insurance risk or they try to mitigate and minimize all the risks. Like some of these insurance companies I've read, 72% of their revenue comes from taxpayers. So
Yeah.
we're already the payer of last resort,
Sure.
right? And so if we're already the payer of last resort, let's just keep that in the back of our mind as we think this through. So somebody's got to pay premiums into the system so that there's a pile of money with which to help the people when they need it. That's it, right? We could have people pay to a bank and just say, look, the bank's going to pay them 3-4% like a money market, and we'll aggregate all of it. And guess what? If you have enough money in the bank to cover whatever it is you need, right? Great, we'll use it. We can call those HSAs and give them tax efficient treatment, but HSAs have a limit of like $4,400 a year.
Yeah.
You don't want people to be limited,
Yeah.
while they're earning more money or while they're healthy, you want them to be able to save more money. But let's just say whatever your premium would be under an ACA Silver program after credits, whatever that number would be, we're going to participate in this program. You are required to deposit that monthly into a bank account, preferably an HSA. And that allows you to deposit it and accrue the interest tax-free. And you accrue all that. And let's just say we set a minimum, you have to be doing it for 6 months.
Okay.
If somebody just doesn't have an operation 1 month in, right? And so after 6 months, you have however much you have in, plus whatever else you want to put in. And if you need that hip replacement, if you can afford it, great. If not, whatever the delta is, that bank is going to loan you the money. And now those premiums, rather than being deposited into the bank, into that HSA, go to the bank to repay the loan that they gave you to get your hip replacement, whatever it is you couldn't afford.
Interesting. Interesting. I mean, I can't help thinking, though, that we might be recreating a system with sort of like adverse incentives if we have this.
Well, yeah, there's always gonna be some way to game the system, right? But at the same time, if now as part of that, when you use that money that you're gonna be able to borrow from the bank, we're gonna ask the government to guarantee it
Yeah.
so that the bank doesn't see risk and it's a lower interest rate.
Right.
We already do that with SBA loans.
Mm-hmm.
We already do that with FHA loans.
Mm-hmm.
We already do it with student loans. So we'll loan you for all these other things and we'll guarantee loans as taxpayers for all those other things. But if you're in a horrific car wreck and you need to be reconstructed and it's $1 million bill,
Mm-hmm.
good luck to you.
Yeah. So all of those other systems all have their own critics, but you think there's much to work through that would still be better than the insurance.
Yeah. And the other thing I didn't get to yet, I would make it so if you're going to borrow that money, you have to purchase at Medicare rates,
I see. Yeah.
because that becomes a limiting factor for a ton of cash that goes into the healthcare system that, so if Mayo and MD Anderson and all the gigantic networks, they want to continue to charge a premium,
Yeah.
they can,
I see.
right? But the majority of the money is going to be at Medicare rates. And, MedPAC will do what they do, and hopefully it's fair. Hopefully with this system, they can pay doctors more under this. Hopefully we'll reduce all the paperwork. That's a nightmare to get your payments and all that, as part of all this. Because if we can reduce the friction for doctors,
Yeah.
if we can reduce the overhead associated for doctors and their practices, then they'll make more money at less remuneration.
Yeah.
And so you just got to find a balance for that. And I think it's there. And so now all of a sudden, patients control what they want. Employers can contribute if they want.
Yeah.
Employers can take on the risk factor if they want and pay for what they would have borrowed otherwise. And then the last thing I say is that you also want to have reinsurance at some level so that the patient in that $1 million horrific accident isn't on the hook for $1 million loan, right? And so that could be paid for by taxpayers because it's going to be cheaper than what we pay to those big insurance companies today. And I think that would be fair. And so whether we set that threshold at $10,000 annually, $20,000, whatever it may be, I think it's worth it in the interest of taxpayers because now we can start to really streamline a lot of these things and reduce a lot of the paperwork at the hospitals. The hospitals don't have all those insurance contracts. They don't have to have all those insurance contracts. If they choose to, I'm not saying get rid of private insurance, right? They can sell whatever, but now they have to compete with a much more efficient system and a much lower cost overhead and administrative system.
Yeah. So tell me, so we went to the future, a better world, but if I had your strongest critic of Mark Cuban cost plus drugs here in the room with me, what is the most compelling, legitimate critique of your approach right now?
We don't sell enough brands or specialty medications. And we have the Team Cuban card, which is a network of 17,000 plus pharmacies so that you can pick things up. But some people might think that that's not enough pharmacies.
Uh-huh.
Those are legitimate thoughts. Other people might say 15% markup is too much. Relative to the industry, it's cheap, but we got to pay the bill. So, look, I always try to ask myself, if I was coming up with a competitor for cost plus drugs, what would I do? And you could, someone like Amazon could do cost plus one or cost minus.
Interesting.
But the reality is our real product is trust. I was listening to a podcast from a doctor, and I don't remember who it was, unfortunately, but he said there's an equation for trust. It's trust equals transparency divided by self-interest. And so the more transparent you are, the higher the numerator, and the less self-interest you have, the lower the denominator.
Yeah.
And so your trust. And I think that's what we've really been able to build. People trust us, not just because we're transparent, but because they know a 15% markup is fair.
That's a pretty good formula. I like that. It's good. And trust is at a premium right now. So, and I think that is worth the investment. So, we have a pretty broad audience. Healthcare is complicated, and you've done a good job explaining this complicated system from your perspective. What are the one or two things you'd like clinicians to know about this so that they could get involved or understand more?
So another great question. So if you look at independent pharmacies, they're closing by the hundreds a year, if not more. And the reason they're closing is that for those same brand medications that they won't allow to be sold through cost plus drugs, when they get reimbursed by insurance companies. So when you walk in the door for that Eliquis and it costs them $570, the insurance company is probably reimbursing them $560. For a $1,300 GLP-1 that costs them $1,300, they may only be reimbursed $750. And so they won't even try to fill it. They'll send it to, a chain competitor. And that's very analogous to what's happening to independent physicians. And what the independent pharmacies did, they created associations that go out and lobby. They have smart people like Doug Huey that, stand out there and say, this is wrong. And so now you're starting to see a lot of legislation from states. Oklahoma is leading the way. Arkansas is leading the way. Pennsylvania is starting to do some things. Texas hopefully will do stuff in the near future that require that PBMs have to fully reimburse and pay a fill fee, a fee for the pharmacist's time. And they can't steer patients to their own captive pharmacies.
I see.
That's exact same thing that's happening with physicians. I mean, it's the exact same thing. Physicians are getting under reimbursed. They're getting late paid. They're getting clawbacks after the fact, after they've offered the service, right? They can't compete with the captive clinics and providers that the insurance companies own. And they're being put out of network so that even if your best friend is a doctor in network and they know that you are the best specialist for this patient, your best friend gets dinged and they're not allowed even to refer you to. You guys don't have an organization calling everybody out for all this. That's just sliding down on your head. That's dumb.
What I hear you is we all need to be better informed and then advocate.
Yes, but you can't advocate individually. And you guys need to be a lot bolder, a lot louder, and call out all these other people. And I'm trying to get into it now as I'm learning it, and I still have a lot to learn. I'm trying, like this conversation, trying to call out, the insurance companies for doing that to independent physicians, because that kills healthcare in this country. And it also forces them either to get out of the business. Now they're pushing into direct primary care, or they sell out. And then when they sell out, now they're having to do 10 surgeries on ankles a day. Right. And not that they can't, not that they don't love doing it, not that they don't want to maximize the number of patients, but it's exhausting.
Sure.
If I'm getting a hip replacement again, I want my doctor rested, not worrying about the next 9 they have to do that day.
So you heard it here first. Wants doctors golfing on Wednesday. It's excellent.
Yes, or playing mahjong. I don't care.
Well, Mark, it's been a real pleasure talking with you, and I learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot from this discussion, and I think it's important for all of us to be better informed and to think how to advocate individually as well as collectively, as you suggest, on how to improve a system that I think we all agree is not working for the goals that we all have. So thank you so much to my guest, Mark Cuban, and to our listeners who are joining us here today. This episode was produced by Daniel Morrow at the JAMA Network. To follow this and our other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit jamanetworkaudio.com or search JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.